My name is Hannah Mico. I work for River Network. I'm the Resilient Programs Manager based out of Michigan, and I'm joined by Yasmine Dyson from the American Flood Coalition. Yeah, so we're here to talk about federal resilience programs and federal funding specifically. And Yasmine, I wanted to start off by asking, what is the American Flood Coalition and what kind of work do you do broadly?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. My name is Yasmine Dyson, and I work as an Associate Director for Strategic Engagement with the American Flood Coalition. We are national nonprofit, nonpartisan, and we really focus on advancing solutions to flooding and sea level rise. The coalition brings together a diversity of members that includes cities and municipalities, elected officials at all levels. To really drive adaptation to higher seas, stronger storms, and more frequent flooding across communities, particularly at the front line of flooding. We have about 425 members and growing in 22 states, and we are very engaged at both local, state, and federal level.
Awesome. So we're talking about federal resilience programs today.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give us some examples of what we mean when we start talking about federal resilience programs, especially in the funding space?
Yeah, absolutely. So federal resilience programs is really, if you think in sort of simple terms, is any program that can fund local resilience projects. So if you want to build a bridge or restore a watershed, or kind of think about building the resilience of your community, both in terms of like green and gray infrastructure, any program that's able to help you realize that project. It could be through funding, like giving you money, it could be technical assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the examples of kind of more common programs is like the hazard mitigation assistance programs through FEMA that gives BREAK and FEMA. Those are the big ones, but you also have smaller ones or less common ones that are given through like HUD and DOT. And when you're thinking about flooding or water, you don't necessarily think, oh, let me go to the Department of Transportation. But there is money in the Department of Transportation that could be used for resilience, and that relates to water. And part of the question when we're talking about federal resilience funding really lies also in the fact that, for example, for flooding, when you go to gov.org and you're looking for information about how can I fund my flood resilience project, you get thousands of results because these programs are, you have about 350 programs across 12 different federal agencies.
Yeah.
That's a lot of information to navigate.
Yeah. So you mentioned technical assistance, and you've now reiterated that there are so many different programs out there. So what is American Flood Coalition doing to help bridge the gap between organizations who want to access this funding and all of these programs that are available?
No, that's a fantastic question. So we're doing several things. Like I said, we are working at the national level. So the American Flood Coalition was involved with many other partners in really advocating while the bipartisan infrastructure law was in conversation to say, hey, you need to include a little bit more money for this. You need to think about rephrasing certain things so that some money can be used for watershed planning, things like that. And once the bipartisan infrastructure law was out, we were thinking, okay, this is great, but most of these programs are delivered through competitive processes. And we were thinking not everyone is ready with like a project that they've just been waiting for historical funding to come and like, hey, here it is. And I have a wonderful application ready to be submitted.
Yeah.
So what we did is with support from partners, particularly the Kresge Foundation, we set up a cohort of communities. We started in the Carolinas.
Okay.
We were thinking we can do two things. One, we can identify communities that they know they have a huge and massive issue with flooding. They have not really had time to think about how are we actually going to solve this through specific projects.
Sure.
They want to do this for the long run, not just, put a Band-Aid on their problem. And that's the best way to use this sort of historical funding. But in the process of helping them identify the right projects and preparing them and connecting them to like, this is the right funding for your project. We are also walking the walk with them and learning where the issues are, what are the hurdles, small and big, and really kind of like taking that learning and say, can we help federal fund programs with specific recommendation that say, there's some things that can be fixed through policy, but there are also certain things like, why do you ask people to provide 5 different documents that are asking for the same thing? For this small town where the mayor is also the lawyer, and he's also 3 other things, they don't have time to do this. And so that's one way. But from a very, very practical resource, the American Flood Coalition also has what we call the Flood Funding Finder. I'm saying this slowly. We refer to it as the FFF. So the Flood Funding Finder is really, instead of like getting the thousands of results and you have to come through them to find out which one is actually going to fund your project. What you get with the FFF is a tool that helps you filter based on the size of your organization. Are you looking for project initiation? Have you already done your study and you just need funding to break ground? Are you looking? And so it helps you to go from just a bunch of results to actual match. And you can go from thousands to like 5 different programs, and that's a little bit more accessible, and it helps communities kind of like identify what they need.
That's an absolute gift of a tool. Thank you for that. I love that you mentioned the smaller communities whose elected officials are serving, in all these different roles and maybe don't have the specific technical expertise that like a really well-resourced community has the privilege and to hire in for those specific roles. And I think a lot of times we see a lot of resilience planning targeted at like large urban cores. But obviously recognizing that resilience planning happens upstream and downstream. So we are working with smaller communities, rural communities, just as much to have those, widespread regional efforts and plans put in place. I'm curious, as you're talking about creating these tools and working with communities on bridging that access gap, what kinds of relationships do you have with those federal agencies that are allowing American Flood Coalition to like be good interpreters of that information to local organizations?
The work that we do is really grounded in the experience of our members. With 425 members, 22 states, but also our partners, that are in this room, in this conference, and beyond. In addition to that, the fact that we're a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., with a policy team that's actually one of the largest teams in the organization, we really have that relationship. But we also bring the experiences that from our members and the commitment and the engagement that we have at the state level, and translate those for federal agencies as a partner and say, hey, we will actually bring you that information. It's up to you to decide if you want to use it and how you want to use it. We make recommendations, obviously, and we've taken, the American Flood Coalition is only 6 years old, but we've used a lot of that time to be able to engage with federal agencies. And we also have a category that we call federal champions. So they're not members because they cannot be members, but these are members of Congress that are really interested in advancing solutions to these issues.
So actual elected officials.
Officials. But also, and they are interested in what's happening with their in their districts. And if you're working with them, they use those experiences as they advance certain priorities in Congress.
If you don't mind, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn into that topic, because that's so interesting to me. How are you identifying or recruiting those elected officials, especially when we're seeing kind of rapid turnover in some of our elected seats? And additionally, like as a nonpartisan organization, how do you work with elected officials who are in partisan seats? I think that's something that a lot of organizations struggle with.
I think it's a struggle, but it's also a great opportunity. Because I was talking to somebody yesterday about watershed planning, and I was like, water does not know what the boundary of a county, of a city, of a state starts and ends. It just flows where it needs to flow. If flooding happens, if you're doing something upstream, it's going to affect people downstream. You have an interest, an actual existential interest in working together.
Yes.
And so we try to sort of rally people around the solutions, so we don't pay too much attention on the differences about who's doing what.
Yeah.
We are non-partisan, and I think it actually helps when people see the sort of the diversity of our membership and the fact that we are working towards the solution. They're less hesitant to say, oh, these people are just in this part, or they're more interested in solutions that, are advancing somebody's agenda. We really just try to say, hey, this is a solution that will benefit you, that will benefit your constituency. Or if we're working with a mayor, we're like, working with your neighbor downstream, this is how it benefits you. And I think when you really just encourage people to think about the outcome, we're less bogged into the details of the how and why.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So these are federal elected officials, correct? So you mentioned that you have a cohort in the Carolinas. Are you finding that you have elected officials from many states that are interested in this work, or are they kind of focused on your spaces where you have those active cohorts?
Yeah. So the elected officials that are a member of Congress are just one category of our membership. We also have elected officials at the state level. We have elected officials at the very local level. Most of our members actually are mayors and town managers and city managers from small town and municipalities across the country. And they're all, they're all interested in this because they are the front line of flooding. This is something that they see every day. They are interested in taking the opportunity that is presented to them right now, but they don't have the capacity to do that. But they're also interested in funding long-term solutions, not just things that are kind of happening right now. And so in the Carolinas, for example, we're working with 4 communities in North Carolina and 2 in South Carolina. We have helped at least 3 of those communities submit an application for BRIC funding.
Oh, wow.
And when we presented BRIC as one of the options, most of them were like, oh, no, that's too big for us. We don't want to do that.
We hear that a lot as well.
Yes.
These federal grants are just too big for municipalities to manage. So I'm glad that y'all are hearing that.
Yes. So there's the issue of access that we talked about, but there's also the issue of managing it when they think about cost sharing. Like we cannot match that. And even if we do, how are we going to manage it after that? How long will it take before we get the money, the reporting, the auditing, all of that? And so we're realizing that it is wonderful that we are working with 10 communities in different places. It is wonderful that River Network and other people are helping some communities, but how sustainable it is, how many other communities are not selected in these cohorts and are not receiving this technical assistance? Is there an opportunity here to say, what we've learned collectively through this process, do we take it somewhere and actually advocate for transformational change that is going to simplify these programs so that all communities everywhere can actually be able to access and be interested? So the system is built for them, not in a way that kind of becomes a burden for them.
Yeah. So you mentioned transformational change in federal funding, which feels like a pretty big bite to take. In your experience working with, municipalities, local governments, state governments, what are you hearing from them about, like, what would a significant change be for them? Like, what would transformational change that actually allowed access look like when we think about taking some of these systems and restructuring them?
Yeah, if you think about a puzzle, the transformational change is like this vision that's not fully realized yet. It's just something that everyone thinks we need. We all want it. We have not really put the pin down, like, this is exactly how we're going to reach it. But we know we have to do that in order to be able to see equitable outcome. And that's really the true north that we're working with. We want to see equitable outcome. We are committed to kind of get to the destination. How we do that has to be a collective effort. There are insights that we've gained as a coalition working on the front line of flooding that are different than what other organizations have gained as well. And we think it's important before we take any action to make sure we are really kind of collecting those data points, make sure we are understanding what community-based organizations trying to access this, funding are facing, municipalities, combination, and different programs. Are some programs working better than others? Are they models that we can learn from in terms of proposing solutions? We want to be thoughtful about the solutions that we're proposing.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't do it the right way, you might lose the opportunity to actually engage with these programs in a meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's really insightful to know, like, we need transformational change, but defining it is something that's going to be an ever-changing, ever-growing thing as we move through these communities and these pools of historical funding. I really like that you mentioned working with, local governments, state governments. At River Network, we work a lot with non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations. And a lot of the work has been focused on getting NGOs to work with their local governments because they have to be together on a lot of these applications to access that funding. So we're also up against bridging some gaps in trust to advance those applications in a meaningful way. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I know you mentioned American Flood Coalition has a really large policy team based out of DC, has access to local elected officials and all the way up the line. Is there anything else about American Flood Coalition that really positions you to do this work well as far as working with these cohorts and bridging that access gap?
Yeah, it's interesting. You said you work a lot with non-governmental organizations. In the cohort that we're working with, we actually, the model that we use was to pair each municipality with a local government and non-governmental entity, and say you have to represent your communities as one entity together, and kind of encourage them to integrate this habit and process of working together from the beginning, not just after you've decided the priorities and the project and you're just like, hey, come and check the box here for community engagement and then goodbye. So kind of like, just thinking about resilience from an equitable perspective. So that has been wonderful. And so those experiences and like I said, the experiences of all our members that we engage with on a regular basis at all levels, I think have just given us as a coalition a lot of insights and a lot of information that we think is valuable in this process. In addition to that, our policy team is not necessarily big, but it's just kind of solidly grounded. Most of these folks have worked with some of these agencies before. They're bringing in that understanding and bridging that gap of language, of approach, where we are not kind of in confrontational mode with the agencies, but we're really kind of like offering them to be the bridge that says, hey, there's all this technical assistance, this philanthropy money that's going through our organizations and many others. There's a ton of information we've learned. There are insights that we have. We can translate those insights into specific policy recommendations and bring them to you and kind of start a conversation and propose to you very tactical, but to also very big solutions and see where that takes us.
One of the things I'm picking up on in our conversation, we've used the words translate, interpret. You just said speaking the same language. There's this component of this that is breaking down the jargon and the level of technicality within federal agencies and bringing that down to a level that's digestible for local community leaders or state leaders to actually utilize. So I'm finding that thread, and I wanted to pull at it a little bit because I think that it's really potent. It's almost like a really square cultural difference that we have to bridge between real communities and the agencies that are trying to serve them well.
Absolutely.
We've talked about a lot of different partners in this work. So elected officials, non-governmental organizations. I love that you said, moving beyond just checking that box of community engagement and actually bringing your community with you. Are there any other folks that need to be involved in making some of these changes when we talk about accessing federal funding? Who else needs to be along on that ride with us to make sure that that's a sustainable transformation when we start doing it?
That's an excellent question, because I think it's going to take a sort of a movement that will not happen in one space, in one spot. There might be, that movement might look like an effort that's led regionally with one organization and nationally with a different one.
Sure.
But I think we also have to keep in mind that the people at the front line of these issues, the ones making a decision about this building, this bridge, this neighborhood, they have a massive amount of wisdom and that we have to tap into, that we have to go and learn from in order to make sure that whatever solutions we're proposing, that, like you said, these big technical terms, these, impressive policy recommendations are really just a way to kind of elevate that wisdom from the ground up. So I think that would be a sort of like an important step and an important stakeholder in this process.
Absolutely. I think sometimes when I approach the work on a federal landscape, as River Network's also a national organization, it can be overwhelming to figure out what kinds of recommendations are relevant locally. So we work with regional organizations, we work with hyper regional and hyper local organizations. We've got statewide, we've got county, and trying to find, that translated relevant message, the relevant piece of the puzzle to get down on the local level when we're working on this national landscape. And I've got partners in, like you said, Oregon and Louisiana and Michigan. And how do I find the pieces that are relevant for all of them? So I love the cohort approach and talking about that kind of regionally led effort and making sure that those partners are well engaged and well prepared. You talked about the federal funding finder. Are there any other tools that American Flood Coalition has created or is in the process of creating that folks should know about? Maybe if they're not in one of your cohorts or one of our cohorts, but other places they can get some good information right now.
I think just in general, we try to make, first of all, membership with the American Flood Coalition is free, thanks to the many partners that are funding us. And I think that has made a huge difference because we have large cities like New York, but we also have small towns of 500 people, and they are all members in the same way, and they all have access to the same resources. So the Flood Funding Finder is a sort of a flagship resource, but we also have, I remember like right after COVID, or during COVID actually, we put together what we call dual disaster handbook. And I'm not hoping or wishing there will be another disaster, but even though that was focused on like just a public health concern that's kind of coupled with flooding, there will be other instances where communities have to deal with two disasters or multiple disasters at the same time. And the information in that handbook is actually helpful in that way. We also have a very active blog where we don't just talk about the nice things we do, but we also kind of like pose questions, interview experts, interview a small town engineer and ask them how their lives is like, leading this moment and needing to go after federal funding to rebuild the whole town or to reimagine a floodplain. So I think those resources are also very, very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I love the dual disaster handbook concept. At River Network, we have a lot of communities we work with through regranting programs and technical assistance programs, and they are experiencing a flood at the same time they were already working with, a sewage infrastructure project that was causing backups that were really dangerous for public health. So it is that dual disaster. And I think we're seeing that more commonly. I would love to reference that resource and make sure that our folks have it as well. As we kind of close out our time today, I was curious if you have anything else you want to share, or maybe where you're finding some energy in your work right now, especially, we just ended talking about a dual disaster handbook. So where are you finding some energy or some positivity in your work right now? What's encouraging you moving forward?
I think what's encouraging me right now is the possibilities that are ahead. We are all talking about this is historical. This is something we'll not see in our life. We only see once in our lifetime. And I think about the choices that we're making every day about how we're using that historical moment.
Yes.
And I want to be responsible and say, if one day, my great grandchildren read about this and they know I was alive and working in this space, what difference did we make? And what choices did we make today with this responsibility that is going to make things better for them in that time? So I think it's both a challenge, but also I think a privilege to be able to be in that moment and be able to do even something small or big to make a difference.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I want to resonate with you on that there is this pressure right now. I keep hearing this is historical amounts of funding. This might never happen again. And it's so much pressure. It's almost overwhelming that like we have to apply for every grant. We have to use every pool of funding. We have to do it the best right now. And it's a little scary. And I think folks are a little overwhelmed, but it's also, this beautiful opportunity to steward that for new generations. So I resonate with that really deeply.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course.